Every underground line has its own particular requirements, its own little idiosyncrasies and peccadilloes. They were built by different companies at different times with different ideas of what was needed. Requirements could change over time as lines were rebuilt and reconfigured. There is no such thing as a one-size-fits-all tube train, and there likely never will be. On the Piccadilly line, the particular requirements dictated a train known as the 1973 stock. The 1973 stock was actually delivered in 1975, and to understand it we need to talk about the Piccadilly line in the 1970s. The Piccadilly line is a busy line indeed. It runs through the West End and out to the suburbs of the south-west and north-east of London. It serves major tourist destinations such as Knightsbridge, Covent Garden, Piccadilly Circus, Leicester Square and South Kensington. It meets the main line at King's Cross St Pancras. It has the Emirates Football Stadium at Arsenal, although back then it was Highbury Stadium. The line splits in two at Acton Town, and until 1994 there was a branch at Holborn to Aldwych. It's a line, in short, that sees heavy use. Up until the 1970s, the line terminated at Hounslow West. In the 1960s, it was felt that perhaps it might be useful to have an underground connection to Heathrow Airport. There had been an airport since 1976 and an airfield since 1930, but the airport was in a state of seemingly continual expansion. Air travel in those days was very different. It was still very much a luxury. When Heathrow Terminal 1 was opened in 1969, the assumption was that passengers would be chauffeur-driven and facilities were designed accordingly. Clearly, the concept of air travel for the masses was considered to be something that no one would have to worry about for a good long time. So it was actually quite prescient that the Piccadilly line extension was authorised in 1967. Construction began in 1971. Hounslow West Station had to be completely rebuilt. The line was rerouted, and as a result the platforms are now some way back from the 1933 station building, which, thankfully, they decided to keep. Originally there was only one airport station at Heathrow, named Heathrow Central, which opened on the 16th of December 1977. The following year, the USA would pass the Airline Deregulation Act, which had wide-ranging effects on the entire industry, both positive and negative. But for our purposes, it resulted in reduced airfares and a massive increase in passenger numbers. So really, it was pretty lucky that someone thought to put an underground station in Heathrow Airport. It would be joined by a station serving Terminal 4 in 1984 and one for Terminal 5 in 2008. But we're jumping ahead. The fact that there was to be an airport service justified the purchase of new trains. At the time, the line used 1956 and 1959 stock, which was perfectly decent in its way, but didn't have much by way of luggage space. Underground trains don't, normally. The new trains, to be known as the 1973 stock, would make this a central consideration of their design. These were trains built specifically for airport traffic. The design takes clear inspiration from the 1967 stock that had been introduced on the Victoria line. It also drew design cues and lessons from the 1972 stock, which itself had been based on the 67 trains. The 1972 stock had no doors on the sides of the driver's cab, so at busy times the driver would have to fight his way through crowded carriages. The trains were designed to be operated with a driver and guard, but with the possibility of conversion to one-man operation in the future. The doors could be selectively closed by the driver, who also had a fault detection panel that would enable him to determine exactly where the problem lay in the event of a breakdown. 25 trains were fitted with de-icing equipment and all had wheel slip protection. Braking and acceleration could be adjusted according to load. These were trains designed to not only be spacious, but safe, efficient, and easy to service. Fans were experimentally fitted to some units, but these never worked very well and were subsequently removed. Anyone who's used the Piccadilly line in the heat of summer is no doubt cursing this decision right now. The trains were built by Metro Camel and first went into service in 1975. The trains consisted of 6 coaches made up of 2 3-car units. 87.5 trains were ordered. Why half? Because of the Aldwych branch. This was operated as a shuttle from Holborn. Passenger numbers were low enough that a single 3-car unit was considered sufficient. The carriages were longer than the 1972 stock trains, but the overall train length was shorter. In 1987, that conversion to one-man operation, or one-person operation as it is these days known, took place. In 1996, more work was completed, more dramatic from the passenger's point of view. A refurbishment was carried out to bring the trains up to date. The trains originally had both transverse and longitudinal seating, but the conversion saw the transverse seating replaced with more longitudinal seating. This reduced the number of seats but increased the overall capacity. Dot matrix destination indicators were installed, wooden flooring was replaced with rubber, and the overall decor was made less 70s. All trains had been upgraded by the end of 2001. The 1973 stock is now some of the oldest on the network, and it's not far off its half-century. But I think it's fair to say that it's rolling stock that's aged very well. The shape is very 60s, but underneath that is a train that can keep up with the demands of the modern underground network, and indeed can outperform some of the more modern stock. In 2025, when it hits that 50-year milestone, replacement is due to begin. The new tube for London, also known as the 2024 stock, is to be introduced into service that year. As you may have gathered, TfL is somewhat short of dosh at the moment, so replacement of older trains across the network is being done in phases. The Piccadilly line is first in line for replacement. In the meantime, a programme is currently underway to extend the life of the 1973 trains until potentially 2027. Now, in my video on the 1972 stock trains, I said that those trains on the Bakerloo line were in need of replacement. But now I'm going to be a contrarian and say, is scrapping the 1973 stock justified? It seems to be a perfectly good train, theoretically, at the end of its life, but far from breathing its last. The only major complaint I can think of is that it isn't up to the standards of modern accessibility. But with a full overhaul it should be possible to fit wheelchair bays, and the reason this hasn't happened, according to the Rail Vehicle Accessibility Exemption TfL put to Parliament, is because of the impending replacement. The 1973 stock's days are numbered. The length of the carriages severely limits the lines it can be used on. For instance, it couldn't be cascaded onto the Bakerloo line, which actually does need new trains. So by the end of the decade, it's likely that these stalwart performers will vanish from the underground. Perhaps they aren't as flexible as some trains, but these were trains designed to perform a specific task. And they did that very well. And they still do. Well, I hope you enjoyed this flighty tale from the tube. If you did, please do click the like button and consider subscribing for more. I'd like to thank my donors on Ko-fi and Patreon. You are the extra luggage space to my unwieldy suitcase. I'd also like to ask what you think. Do you think the 1973 stock should stay or go? Let me know in the comments section. And I'll see you all again very soon for another tale from the tube.